The period of time between 1939 and 1946 was a time of turmoil and clash for many of the powerful countries on the European continent and a few others as well. For one, this period harbored what we know in history to be World War II. World War II brought about years of devastation and death to multiple countries around the world. The war mainly took place between the Axis powers, which included Nazi Germany, Japan, and Italy. Fighting against them were the Allies, which included France, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the US. This war produced a death toll of over 15 million soldiers from all over, and possibly over 50 million civilian deaths as well. World War II also introduced technologies like poison gas and flamethrowers into modern warfare, but one war strategy that also added to the hostility of it all was the use of psychological warfare. It is called by a few names, like psychological operations, which is usually referred to as psyops for military purposes, and propaganda. Psychological warfare, or psyops, in the case of World War II, was the use of a wide variety of media to attempt to alter the minds or behaviors of a group of people. It could be used on citizens within the country that the propaganda originated from, or enemies on the front lines during war. It is sometimes coined as the science of persuasion. It didn't originate from World War II or even World War I, seeing as persuasion isn't anything new. Propaganda came in the form of magazines, comic books, posters, leaflets, pamphlets, and messages broadcasted over radio. This made it easy to get messages out to a large amount of people within short specific amounts of time.
What is this man thinking? What does he feel? What will he do next? The answers to these questions are important to you, the American soldier. Your life, the security of your home and country may depend on them. For this man is your enemy or is a member of a neutral or friendly foreign group.
Much of the propaganda used in World War II was used to inspire positive behavior regarding the war. During the war, many of the men who had previously been working in factories, assembly lines, and war production went off to fight. This left a gaping hole in production and an increasing need for a labor force. So to combat the need, propaganda messages were put out to inspire women to help the war effort. In other instances, the same type of propaganda was made to draw more willing, passionate men to join the fight. Sometimes discouraging news or messages printed in leaflets would be dropped by bomber planes over enemy lines. It was one way to decrease enemy morale. Another relevant strategy that was used was to discourage citizens from speaking too loosely about information that could expose the Allies and possibly put people at risk of an attack by implying that their safety would be at risk and their loved ones at war. In these ways, propaganda became a useful tool for generals and officers in charge of military and war activity. But as the war was only just starting for America on the eastern and western fronts, certain themes portrayed in propaganda began to fan the flames of racism and distrust within the borders of our home sweet home. Over time, the propaganda only helped to arouse a hatred for the Japanese Americans. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Empire of Japan on December 7, 1941, and Roosevelt's declaration of war against Japan, tension and conflict increased within the U.S. along with outside. Racial relations were already a little rocky. Some of the media formulated for the war held controversial messages, unlike the normal pro-war ones. While the media targeted both the Japanese and Germans, it mostly affected the Japanese Americans living in the U.S. at the time. Some of the images posted to the public held anti-Japanese messages, which helped foster a negative view for even those with a Japanese ancestry who were American-born. These various forms of media often contained derogatory and racist themes like the ones shown. Sometimes they painted Japanese people to be brutes, monsters, gorillas, and even pigs. This use of psychological warfare convinced people that this subgroup of citizens were truly bad people with even worse intentions. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. began to suspect and doubt these people of their loyalty, even if they were legal citizens.
On December 7, 1941, the Empire of Japan launched an attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. In the following months, hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans were rounded up and sent to internment camps under suspicion of disloyalty to the United States. But the feelings that paved the road to internment began long before the attack. For more than 80 years, Asian immigrants were viewed as economic threats, spurring various laws that effectively banned them from the country. For those who made it to America, the lingering resentment culminated after Pearl Harbor. Motivated by vocal outcries from politicians and military officials, FDR signed Executive Order 9066, empowering the U.S. Army to designate areas from which any or all persons may be excluded.
After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. began to suspect and doubt these people of their loyalty, even if they were legal citizens. This sort of widespread paranoia led to the creation of internment camps. Roughly 120,000 to 130,000 people had been upended and removed from their homes with little notice and/or compensation. They were taken and moved to internment camps, which were sometimes situated in the middle of nowhere. It is shocking to find out that roughly 2/3 of these people were natural-born U.S. citizens and had little to no relations with the country of Japan, other than their heritage. Their loyalties were with the U.S. since it had been the only home they knew. They were treated like prisoners, being caged in with barbed wire like animals and being surveillanced by guards almost like the prisoners in Auschwitz. Money was hard to come by. These people also had to try and farm food from the barren, dry desert soil that the camps were settled upon. Small barracks were provided with cots for beds and communal mess halls. This is where the real conflict arises, seeing as this was a clear violation of their rights. The U.S. only offered a small sum of money to those affected and offered little to no sympathy at the time. Even the Supreme Court defended the measures taken in the name of war, as it calls for desperate measures. Despite being a country that stands and fights for liberty and civil rights overseas, the United States was quick to revoke those same rights which all were supposed to be entitled to within its own borders. When many of these people returned back home, they were shocked to see homes ransacked and looted. They were received back home with even more negativity and judgment. It would take the U.S. close to 40 years, despite winning the war, to attempt to reconcile with those victims for lost time. The closest thing to compromise today for those victims were Ronald Reagan's passing of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. This act sought to somehow repay the people burdened by the severe inconvenience, for lack of better words. But one thing to remember is that no amount of money can erase the injustice, the stain from history. The compromise will never be enough, and this is one conflict they'll never forget.